Coming off a thrilling Olympic tournament, you can see many of the world's best hockey players this weekend in Ottawa for the latest edition of the PWHPA's Secret Dream Gap Tour. You can watch the final game on Sunday morning on Sportsnet, by the way, 11 a.m. Eastern time, 8 a.m. Pacific. Now, joining us to discuss the latest on the women's game is, well, the star of the hockey show during the Olympics. She also covers the Flames for The Athletic. It's Hailey Salvian. Now, Hailey, you had a perfect seat to watch the Olympics. We know how many millions of people tuned in to watch the finals. So taking all of that into account, the state of the women's game is what?
Ooh, yeah, that's a loaded one to start right after the nice compliment. You set me up and then you go right with the tough one. I think the state of the women's game, and this is the right time to talk about it, coming with, millions and millions, that's not even hyperbole, millions of people watching the gold medal game, the game that started at 11 o'clock Eastern time. This is the right time to discuss it because I think the stakeholders in the women's game know that there's no better time to capitalize on the attention because it's at its peak. And the state of the women's game at the professional level, it's tough. It's really hard. You have these two different, entities operating, the PHF, which is the US-based pro league, and quite a bit of turmoil right now. They've had a number of departures. Their commissioner announced that this was the last year that she would be working. So she's leaving at the end of the season. They're actively looking for a new commissioner right now. The head of their players association was relieved of her duties only a couple weeks after being hired. So they don't have a commissioner for next year. They currently don't have anyone looking after the players in terms of a players association representative. And there's been a number of changes and what they believe to be improvements in terms of their salary structure and benefits for players. But there's still quite a bit of turmoil with that league. And I think a lot of the things that they've done are to attract the best players in the world who just came back from the Olympics. But the best players in the world are currently with the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association, which is the PWHPA, who is having their showcase in Ottawa this weekend, Washington, D.C. next weekend. And that's where they all currently are, doing these showcases, which they've done for the last few years. And they're currently fighting for a league that they believe is professional, a league that has all the resources and pay structure and leadership that befits professional athletes. So that's kind of where everything's at right now. This is where it's been at for the last 3 years now since the Canadian Women's Hockey League folded. There's been a lot of questions about what comes next. And again, as I said, I think the stakeholders in the game know that now's the time to capitalize on all the attention and start to push forward, for the PWHPA at least, the goals of creating a truly professional women's hockey league.
Okay, so let's focus on these two entities that are sort of operating simultaneously. Jeff Merrick on Twitter sort of likened it, if you know your hockey history, to the WHA and the NHL trying to exist at the same time. So here's another tough question for you, Hailey. Is having two entities at the same time ultimately a good thing for women's hockey?
I think so, because I think it shows the depth of talent in the women's game. I don't think there's anything wrong with there being a league with all the best players to play in, and then another league for players to continue playing hockey. And I think it shows, again, just the depth of talent in the women's game. I think that, a truly professional women's league that they're fighting for, it's probably small at first because you want to make sure you're building something that lasts. So this isn't going to be a league with, like the NHL with hundreds and hundreds of roster spots. This is going to be like 6, 7, maybe 8 teams. That's not a ton of opportunity. That's the upper echelon, the cream of the crop, players that make that league. And for everyone else, it's either you hang up your skates or you go into a support role. So I don't see anything wrong with there being two different leagues operating, one with, the best 100, 150, 200 players in the world, maybe not 200, but, and then another league that will be able to continue the opportunities for women in hockey. I know in terms of a business standpoint, that becomes a different kind of topic and a different question. But I think if you were to ask the PHF, and they don't have any issue, or not the PHF, excuse me, the PWHPA, they're not saying we want the PHF to fold so we can do what we want to do. They're just saying this is what we want to do. and they're not saying there can't be two. I think,
Mm-hmm.
The one league aspirations came up when the CWHL, the NWHL were operating. And that kind of narrative has continued, but I think most of the players and, the leadership group with the PWHPA, they're not saying we want the PHF to cease to exist.
The one league concept seems to be, as you mentioned, where this conversation always goes. And, we talked about this a little bit off air. The eyeballs really come in when it's best on best. So is that ultimately where we have to go to have women's hockey the healthiest it can be?
I think so. I think, again, we see the eyeballs follow historically when it's best on best. And that's at the Olympic Games. It's Canada and the US, 3.54 million viewers on NBC in the United States, 2.7 million in Canada on CBC. Again, that's the game that started at 11 o'clock at night. And people are staying up and watching this game because it's good hockey. It's exciting hockey. It's the best players in the world fighting against the best players in the world for the biggest prize. And unfortunately, that's the peak. That's it. Every 4 years, we get this one game where millions of people watch. The players put their bodies and everything on the line to win it. And then the eyeballs kind of drift off and they fade away. And maybe there's a great Women's World Championships that people watch. And maybe there's a great tournament or a showcase that people watch. But we've never seen that recreated in the pro women's game. I think the CWHL started to get a bit of a mix of both. They had Hilary Knight playing for Montreal and Casey Bellamy and Brianna Decker playing in Calgary. So we started to see some of those players shifting over, but we've never had all the best players from Canada, all the best players from the US, even the best players from Europe. Like if there is a league that has the resources, that has the pay structure, this is a league that ideally attracts the Jenny Hirkoskis from Finland, the Elina Muellers from Switzerland. And I think that has always been what makes women's hockey, not just at the professional level better, but at the international level better. And that was something we heard in 2010 at the World Hockey Summit from Hailey Wickenheiser, when they discussed, Canada and the US are always in the gold medal game. It's always the same teams winning. How are we going to make women's hockey at the international level better? And Hailey Wickenheiser stood up and said, we need a women's pro league that is going to not just make the pro game better, but it's going to befit everyone else. Because when you have the players from Europe coming over, they're going to get better because they're playing against Marie-Philippe Poulin on a day-to-day basis. And they're shooting on, Noura Ratu, the best goalie in the world, on a day-to-day basis. Everyone gets better when they're in that league where all the best players in the world are. So it's not just better from a viewership standpoint. We get to watch it selfishly, but the players get to get better. There's a pro league for them to make a livable wage. And then the international game gets better too. And I think that's where it needs to go.
All right. A lot of work to be done, but it does feel like we have a little bit. Yeah, a little work is sort of an understatement, but it does feel like we have some momentum coming off the Olympics. Let's keep it going with the Secret Dream Gap Tour this weekend. Of course, another reminder, you can watch the final Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern time on Sportsnet. Hailey, thanks so much for your insight. This was really great.
Thanks for having me.